Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today we're going to be talking all things sport, football, changes of culture, dealing with different cultures as a coach, and we're going to be doing so with football coach Blaine McKenna. Blaine, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show.
Yeah, it's great to be back again.
Yeah, really pleased to have you back on. Really excited to talk about the topic that we're going to be talking about. And it's remiss of me not to mention that the topic we're going to be talking about is actually taken from your book, your new book, your brand spanking new book, Coaching Abroad, How 8 Coaches Got Jobs and Succeeded Worldwide. Many congratulations on the new book.
Yeah, thank you. You know yourself. It's a long process. It's just it's good to get it out there.
Yeah, it's an exciting time when your book hits the bookshelves. Let's start by you reintroducing yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience.
Okay, so I'm Blaine McKenna from Northern Ireland. Been coaching abroad for seven years now in a range, 11 countries on 5 continents. So I've seen a lot of what football has to offer in the world.
You're well travelled.
Yeah.
What countries?
So we got Canada, America, Dubai, Kuwait, Singapore, New Zealand, Thailand, Malawi, South Africa, and I've lost everyone's obviously in the UK as well. There's one more I've just lost for the, off the top of my head.
Well, I'm putting you on the spot. This might be the toughest question to answer today because it is slightly putting you on the spot. I'm sure living in all of those countries was a wonderful experience, but what's been your favourite experience?
I'd have to say Thailand. That's why I'm back here today, to be honest, because
okay,
like the place where I was living and things, there were no foreigners or anything. It was just all locals. You didn't see foreigners day to day. It was the most difficult challenge I've ever had because when you coach in cities and things, it's very different because it's very diverse. You get people from lots of different countries. But when you're in an area in the northeast of Thailand on the border of Laos and Cambodia, like it's a very, very different experience.
How's your Thai?
Well, honestly, I haven't spoken it. It was okay. Back in the day, I had to speak it every single day because none of the players spoke English. If I didn't speak Thai, I'd be very hungry day to day because I wouldn't be able to get food or anything. So back then, 3 or 4 years ago, it was pretty good. But in recent years, I've not spoken it as much because I've been in more international settings where English is the first language.
Well, you mentioned players you were coaching not able to speak any word of English there, and I'll refrain from getting you to expand on that a little bit and how you cope with that, because really that's what we're here to talk about today is dealing with the challenging cultural aspects, the cultural changes that coaches face when they head abroad to coach. But let's talk a little bit more about what you're doing right now today before we reflect backwards. Are you still coaching at the moment?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we last spoke when I was in Singapore, and that wasn't too long before COVID began, and my life kind of went upside down after that, basically, in terms of what I was doing.
All our lives went upside down, I think, a little bit there.
Yeah, because before that, like I was always looking at the next long-term goal. I was always thinking, I want to get to this level, I want to get to this club, I want to do these things, and also like from my previous experience in Thailand, I kind of achieved my career goal, which was to become academy director of a professional club. So I already had that in the bag. Then I went to Singapore, and I left Singapore, and I was meeting clubs in Cambodia, like Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, in New Zealand as well. So I was traveling all around the place. And then 3 months later, COVID came and everything just shut down, and I had no job because I just left that job expecting that the world was my oyster. And then things just completely just went upside down, and I just reevaluated a lot of things because it just made me realize that the way I was living my life wasn't healthy. I was always looking to the future. I wasn't living in the moment, and I was always chasing long-term goals because that's what I believe successful people did. And it was only when I experienced that and all these jobs fell through. I was supposed to become assistant technical director in a country of 100 million people. I was going to join professional clubs, and then everything just kept falling through because the budgets were going up. You couldn't get into countries. Like everything was just falling through, and it made me realize that like I started living my life through values, so caring for myself and others, curiosity, trying to learn and improve every day, and then creativity as well, so trying to develop sessions and programs to help people. And I find my life is a lot better living from that. And also I've stepped back from coaching full-time now. I'm coaching part-time and work with players online. I've just released my book, and I'm living in Phuket, which is a beautiful environment compared to the kind of smoggy cities and things I've lived in before, which I realized wasn't in line with how I wanted to live my life.
That's really interesting, Blaine. I mean, we're here to talk about your book, but obviously this links into your book because it's giving you the space to write this book. I think I heard you correctly when you said, I'm trying to live via values rather than long-term goals. And it sounded to me like you had chosen three values that maybe influence the behaviors that you would engage in daily: caring, curiosity, and creativity. Three C words. Would I have heard you correctly there?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And so I'd just be interested to unpack those a little bit. So, um, from a caring perspective, and as I ask this question, I suppose one could answer this in quite a simple manner. Well, I'm just caring for people, but is it a little bit broader or deeper than that? What do you personally mean by caring? What does caring mean to you as a value? What behaviours would I see from you related to caring?
Well, there's a bigger picture to it because it's part of my life as well. Like the place I've lived in, sort of caring for myself is living in an environment that makes me happy because I've lived in so many different places. And now it makes me realize that what I really want from life, the kind of place that I want to be. So it starts with myself in terms of caring, living close to a beach, doing things you enjoy every day. And then it extends into my work as well in terms of, and also like my relationships with other people as well. So always trying to do my best for other people in my family, the players I work with online or on the ground day to day. So it's, yeah, it's an extension of those things in terms of lifestyle, but then also day to day actions as well.
It's funny that you said caring for yourself first because we at the moment we're talking a lot about coach well-being and how important that is. If we want to care for our players, we need to care for ourselves first. If we're burning out, then we don't have a lot of we probably won't have a lot of capacity to care for our players.
Yeah, I completely agree because like I lost myself basically in terms of my career because I was so career driven, as I said before, like chasing those long term goals all the time. I wasn't really thinking about myself or looking after myself, and it was just basically it was just all about the job. And then you realize long term that doesn't actually help your performance in terms of how you interact with people and things.
Yeah, less is more. Less is more. Curiosity, creativity. Briefly take us through those two.
Yeah, so curiosity is basically revolves around reading, taking courses, doing things to just try and develop knowledge all the time. And creativity is developing sessions to try and help people. It's developing programs and resources to try and help people as well, the players I work with, and also myself day to day to improve my practice.
When did this change occur in your life? How long have you been living through these values?
It's just since COVID, basically, when I had time to reflect on these things because when you're in the wheel of working full time, you don't really have time to think about this. You just think about the next day, tomorrow, the next project, where you want to get to, and you don't actually take time to think about these things. So obviously, COVID had a lot of negative impacts worldwide, but then it gave you that moment to think, that bit of respite that you needed.
And where do you find yourself now?
Yeah, like I'm in the best place I've ever been, honestly, in terms of
Okay.
even career wise as well, because the jobs that I was going to go for during COVID, the people that are in those jobs now have already left and they're only in those jobs for a few months because you know what football is like, the lack of stability. So right now I'm in a much more stable position, living in a beautiful place, and I can still live my values every day as well. And that just makes me a lot happier. And I'm not trying to look at the job titles I have or chase things to try and make other people happy. Like I'm putting myself first for the first time in my life, and like I'm reaping the rewards of that.
It's given you the opportunity to write a book. That's what we're here today to talk about. The book is called Coaching Abroad. Probably the title gives us a slight clue as to what it's about, and your mini biography gives us an insight into well the notion that you're going to be an expert in this area. But tell us a little bit about the genesis of this book. When did you start? Obviously, COVID changed your life, and was it then that you just thought, "I've got all this information, I'm going to write this down in a book," or did you have that spark a little bit before COVID?
Um, well, I wrote a blog about coaching abroad a number of years ago, and that was the
Hmm.
piece of writing that seemed to resonate most with people and got the most interaction. And for me as well, coming through like my journey, I was in Northern Ireland. I love football, but I didn't see it as a real career because there weren't many opportunities where I lived. So basically, what I want to do is, and I know it's the same worldwide, there are so many coaches that aren't getting the opportunities they deserve at home. And if you want to work in football full time, you're basically going to have to leave where you live to go and chase this dream. And for me, I just basically wrote this and I made it as cheap as possible, as accessible as possible, because I want to try and help as many people live their dreams through football, because there's a massive world out there and people that are stuck in their own little bubbles at home don't understand how to access it. So it's essentially an ultimate guide. I've interviewed coaches at different stages of their careers about how they got jobs and how they adapted to cultures and succeeded around the world, because basically that's the life I've lived. It's changed my life, and I want to help other people change their lives too through football.
It's a very interactive book in that respect. Does it follow 8 coaches?
Yeah.
And you've interviewed them and you've broken down their experiences of coaching abroad?
Yeah, so essentially one chapter is about a coach's journey, and in the next chapter is kind of an educational one about like networking, their advice how to network, how to get jobs, 5 pathways into professional football. So it's kind of a mix of their stories plus their advice in certain topic areas.
And I was keen to get you on the show. Obviously, there's a broad range of topics within the book, some of which would be beyond the scope of the things that we talk about on the Sports Site show. But a couple of chapters, when you sent it to me and gave me the opportunity to read it, thank you for that. A couple of chapters really caught my eye that could be wonderful topics of conversation for this podcast. And that basically centered, those 2 chapters basically centered on the cultural aspects that coaches face when they go and coach abroad. I think you've got 2 chapters dedicated to cultural aspects of coaching. This is a big deal, isn't it? It's a challenge for coaches when they coach abroad to be able to acclimatize and accommodate individual and group differences, cultural differences.
Yeah, it's number one reason coaches fail abroad. It's all down to the culture.
And so, tell me a little bit how you tackle these chapters.
So the first one is managing across cultures. So all of the coaches I interviewed have coached in the UK,
Okay.
and all of them have coached in Asia.
Yep.
And in terms of cultures around the world, those are 2 of the most contrasting ones. So basically, the first chapter looks into what they have when they land in a country, the kind of things that they're facing. And then it goes through and looks at managing up. So how they interact with different people, the kind of experiences they'll have. It's more so off the field. And then the second chapter on culture is on cross-cultural coaching approaches. So actually how that affects your practice on the pitch. So one's kind of off the pitch, managing up all the different things you'll face day to day. And then the second one is how that impacts your practice on the field of play.
So we're really comparing UK to an Asian culture. And the differences that coaches will experience when they go and coach in Asia. Will I be hearing you correctly?
Yeah.
And so you mentioned stepping off that plane, the first day, the first week, the first month. What kind of cultural differences might a coach face?
Well, right away, it's how you greet people. Because I've made mistakes in different countries. When I was coaching in the Middle East, I went up to shake a woman's hand that was one of the players' mums. And it was a very awkward handshake. And right away, I knew that she didn't want to shake hands. I was told after that, you never offer your hand to a woman unless she offers her hand first. And then if you take it into Thailand, you Y people. So you put your 2 hands together and you bow. So I'm meeting the president. I had to get that right. Otherwise, I'd have no chance at the club. So it's
Right.
number one is just how you greet people, and then it builds from there in terms of how you interact. Because like a lot of coaches go into different countries and they think they're being brought in to rip everything up and do it their way. But that's why people fail, because you have to get the best out of the local people. Otherwise, you have no chance of succeeding. And even one of the coaches I interviewed, Simon McMenemy, he won the league in Indonesia, and he says there's a million better coaches than him in the world, but there's not many that can understand the culture better in Indonesia and their religious practices to try and get the best from people, which led him to having success in that country.
Well, just breaking down a few things you said there. I mean, this is the Sports Psych Show. Let's think of psychology. Let's think of confidence. Let's think of anxiety. Let's think of worry. Let's think of doubt. Let's think about, from a biopsychosocial perspective, our social environment influences our psychology in the moment, and it does so in a very speedy way. You walk off that plane, you walk into your first meeting, you walk into a room to meet the people you're going to be coaching, maybe, as you said, the parents of the people you're going to be coaching. It's an anxious moment, isn't it? Because even if you've done your homework, there may be some things, there can be some doubt there, can't there? Because you don't 100% know whether you're going to be aligning yourself with the cultural traditions and protocols that the country that you're in, that you're coaching in, actually require.
Yeah, so what typically happens when you're going into these countries, a lot of the time you're going into a position that's higher than what you've held before because of your experiences in the past. And if they're generally bringing a foreigner in to head up a position, you can get imposter syndrome right away. So I was 25 years old. I was going into a professional club to become academy director. I've never have had that opportunity back in the UK. So right away, you're doubting yourself, like, can I do this? And basically, these jobs don't get advertised. I only got this job because a year before I helped someone with their A license coursework. So it's kind of the way football works. You help people and then you get opportunities, even though at that time I didn't deserve it really. So you kind of go into these positions, you have that imposter syndrome and you just don't know how things work. So people are talking a lot and you're not sure what they're saying. Are they talking about you? You're in that region. I was the only foreigner, so I felt like that everyone wanted me to fail, and maybe that wasn't the case, but you kind of just feel that everyone's staring at you, everyone's taking pictures of you, like you just come into this town. So it's, yeah, it takes a while to get your feet under the table, and you don't understand how football works there. The culture is completely different. Like you don't know how to interact with people. At the start, I didn't have a very good translator, so that was very difficult as well. So it's hard to get my messages across. And like anytime you step into a new role or you move to a new
Mm.
country, like how you get around, where you're living, where to eat, like there's so many different factors that come together to make it. It's a very uncomfortable experience at the beginning, but in terms of when I went to Thailand, I was very lucky. The president's son and that physio picked me up from the airport. They did everything, looked after me very well. I've landed in other countries where I haven't had that provision. I'm literally going out into a place that I don't know where anything is. I'm trying to buy bed sheets for my bed. I'm getting the wrong size bed sheets. There's all these kind of things that come together and it can make it a very uncomfortable experience. So like having good people there to greet you makes a massive difference, but you still have massive, massive self-doubt, and it takes a while for you to feel comfortable in that environment until you understand how things work and you start seeing that you're making progress and you're making progress within the club.
When you reflect back, were there specific things that you were doing behaviorally or thought processes you were engaging with that enabled you to sit with discomfort in those moments?
Yeah, and it kind of teaches you lessons. Like as I said before, I've made mistakes culturally, so it helps you observe what you're seeing around you. So you're when you're not sure, you follow other people's lead and you ask questions, because at the beginning you don't really know what questions to ask. But the more countries you live in, the more adaptable, the more you can kind of see things. You can open your mind to different ways of doing things, and that's probably one of the biggest benefits of working abroad. That adaptability, and then also another fact as well, like I came from coaching at not a great level in the UK. I was coaching in grassroots. I was having to be adaptable. I was doing school sessions. You didn't have any space. You didn't have the right equipment. Not everyone loved football. So those kind of experiences back there helped me. Whereas people coming from clubs where things are done very professionally and they land in a foreign country, like that can be very difficult because like in your mind you think, well, it's done like this in England, it's done like this in Ireland, and you expect things to be like that. That's kind of where coaches fail. They don't have that open mindedness or the patience to see how things are done there and observing it and then understanding how their approach can work in that environment, because that's the most important thing. You have to understand how your approach can work there. And initially, you have to approach things in a different way, because if you try and copy and paste what happened at home, you're going to fail because people see a coach in a different way in different countries. So, for example, in Asia, they see the coach as a dominant person that has all the answers. So if you go in and you start giving them a bit of ownership in things, they'll think coach has been indecisive. Why does he not know what's the best approach here? And if he's not as dominant, they think that they're in for a bit more of an easy ride. So it takes time to implement these new ideas in different environments.
Do you think that's got implications for coaches' education and coaches' philosophies um, as they learn and grow? That it's absolutely vital for coaches to have a number of philosophies, tools, techniques to be flexible and adaptable, in order to flex and adapt in a different culture, in a different country. For example, there might be quite a few coaches out there who might say, well, I just like to do it this way. This is the right theory for me. It must be autonomy supportive, for instance. It's all about asking the right questions. And at no stage should I, let's say, authoritatively, not autocratically, but authoritatively drive my messages through. That feels like if I adopt that kind of one-sided approach to coaching, that I won't necessarily be able to adapt in another country, or at least I won't adapt very quickly.
Yeah, well, to be honest, that's why I wrote two books on this because, as I said before, this is one of the biggest things that coaches struggle with. Because if you've only coached in one environment or one country,
Mm,
like you can have an idea that works really well within that environment, so you think that's the best way of doing things.
mm,
But it's only whenever you go to different countries you learn to be a bit more adaptable, to be a bit more pragmatic sometimes, and it's through those experiences. And I understand what you're saying in terms of flexibility and things, and you need that a bit in certain environments, but it's only once you've lived in different countries now I understand the importance of it. Because if you've only worked in that one environment, that one country, you can have a pretty sure idea that this works here. And I've had discussions with coaches about this. Like I met a guy in Phuket one time. He's working in Denmark, and he's like, Blaine, I found this great way of working. And I had to kind of help him understand that the things he was telling me about, if he goes and coaches students that are used to having a 40 in a classroom, the teacher tells them all the answers. They've never answered a question in
mm,
their entire lives. That's a very hard thing to implement. And like within the book, in one of those culture chapters, I've got a section that's titled "Culture Shift in Hong Kong." And they talk about how the Hong Kong FA have basically broken down that approach because in Hong Kong, as I said, they sit in a classroom. It's a very one-way process. The teacher filtering information. There's no questions. It's not a two-way process. And then even at home and things, the parents and the nannies do everything for them. So they had to try and change that within their environment. They tried to change those things, and it took a while to do it. But over time, they were able to make a difference in terms of the culture within their environment. And you also have to respect that the national culture is there to be respected, but then within your environment, you can tweak things that can get positive outcomes. But it takes time for them to buy into it because there's so many cultural factors bubbling under the surface.
And is that a part of your message within those chapters within your book? Is that I can land in Indonesia or China or Thailand or India or any country, whether it's Asia or anywhere in the world, I have to appreciate the cultural dynamics that are embedded into that culture at that time. But over time, I may be able to shift. It just depends on um, how deep those cultural approaches are tethered to that specific culture.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And you've also got to have the right people within the environment to do that as well. So your recruitment might have to filter into these things as well. But yeah, over time you can do it. But the starting point is understanding where they're at, what experiences they've had in the past. And also that's why the local staff within the club are so important because they can tell you how things work. They can tell you what's not worked in the past. They might have had a foreigner come in, try and do these things. So it's about research at the beginning, trying to talk to as many people as you can, see what's been done before, see what's worked, what's not worked, and then looking at the best approach of how your ideas can fit within that environment while also utilizing the strengths of that culture and what's already there in terms of their identity and things, how you can tap into that. So yeah, you can definitely do it, but it takes time, and you have to have. And the key thing about these two chapters, it's opening people's minds to different ways of thinking because that is the central requirement to working abroad. And if you can't do that, like you can't succeed within that environment because essentially your job is about getting the best out of local people. And if you can't do that, you can't succeed.
We've talked a little bit there about, I suppose, authoritative versus autonomy supportive coaching. Um, Tell me a little bit about the tech tac side of things because psychology is still embedded into the technical tactical side of things. And I suppose really I'm speaking more to the tactical side of things here. You know, principles of play are universal. Coaches build their game models based on on principles of play. So really, do game models in, let's say, a Western culture transfer to preferred styles of play in more of an Asian culture? Do coaches have to make any considerations here?
Yeah, 100%. So, for example, when Spain were doing so well, Spain were winning the Euro, Spain were winning the World Cup, everyone was trying to hire Spanish coaches in China. And
Mm.
if you watch the Chinese teams play, they circulate the ball very well, they keep possession very well. But in terms of breaking lines and penetrating in the final third, there weren't many players that wanted to do that. And that was because of the culture, because from a young age, they've had coaches. If they take risks, if they lose the ball, the coaches that I've seen be quite critical of them. So when they don't have that freedom, they don't want to take risks, they play very safe. And then also in terms of the coaches they've had in the past, like coaches in Asia, a lot of the coaches, I don't like the stereotype because there's lots of different types of coaches, but like ones that I've seen, they like, and it stems from the culture as well. They like in terms of, they like order, so they like lines, they like things being neat and tidy because it makes them feel good as a coach. And I can completely get that. I completely understand it. So for example, whenever we went into China to do coach education, the PE teachers didn't really like our approach because it was a bit more chaotic. It was a bit more games based, and it made them feel a bit uncomfortable. So, in terms of going back to originally what you're talking about, coaches can come in and their practices, their session design can fit within that setting how they want to play, but they have to understand the the mindset of the players. In that one example, the
Mm.
bravery on the ball in terms of what experiences they've had. So you've got to adapt what you're trying to do and fit it to meet the needs and the strengths of the players that you're working with.
So creativity may be at a minimum, and expecting creativity might be something that you have to temper as a coach, for example. Expecting players to make those penetrating runs up the pitch, taking the opposition on, playing through balls, risky through balls, those kind of things. I'm just thinking of this word expectation. Coaches need to temper their expectation from a technical and tactical perspective, um, if they're going into another culture, if they're coaching in another culture.
Yeah, you got to pitch it. So the coaches said that their sessions and things they can fit anywhere in the world, but the education that the players have had might not be the same as the players they've experienced in the past. So it's football understanding of the game in terms of the types of practices, the types of information they've been given, but then also those psychological factors in terms of bravery on the ball. Because when you've been ingrained in a culture, and this is from school, they start school 4 or 5 years of age, they've had this their entire lives, and it's very hard to switch that to being brave on the ball. You have to really make them understand that this is a safe space. You can make mistakes. That's okay. You can answer questions because there's so many cultural factors that have always told them that's not a thing they feel comfortable doing. So, like, it takes time. You have to do it yourself. You have to get the right players and leaders within the group to buy into this as well and to show their vulnerabilities and that they're being accepted even though they make mistakes sometimes. So, like, it's a process, but it all comes from that kind of psychological safety, that environment you create that makes them feel that they're comfortable doing it and they realize the benefit they're going to get from it. Because ultimately you have to get success whatever approach
Mm.
you implement, especially in the first team setting. You can have all the ideals you want to play in this way, but you only get so much time to implement your ideas.
That has enormous repercussions for a coach, because what helped you become successful in one environment, one culture, isn't necessarily easily transferred to another environment, another culture, especially if you're um, crossing the globe, especially if you're going into a culture that perhaps doesn't have a strong history of playing in the style in which made you successful. It just, there's no question here, mate. It just makes me think of the importance of coaches really considering their options and really thinking about how they like to coach, the style in which they like to coach, and the style in which they want their players and teams to play in. They've got to think before they actually make that move.
Yeah, because when I first came out, I was trying to play in the kind of same way I wanted to play, playing from the
Mm.
back, taking risks. But it's, and we played in the Thai Youth League, and only two teams played that way. Two of the top teams played that way, but the rest of them didn't take risks. They played long. If they lost it, they got plenty of players behind the ball. They're more compact. They're more solid. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and also how that looks on like a national scale as well. If you have youth players playing that way, and you come up against stronger countries, like it's very hard for them to adapt. The players aren't going to develop as technically well within a certain system. So it's the football culture within the country plays such a massive role within that in terms of like what way the teams in that country are playing that get success. They help them buy into it and believe in what you're trying to do.
Here in England, here in the UK, players are quite used to being strongly spoken to. Let's describe it in that way. If they make a mistake, and whether that's right, whether that's wrong, is a debate for another day. Players are used to that. I'm guessing that might be different in some countries that you've coached in.
Yeah, saving face is a massive thing. So if you criticize, and it goes back to like ancient philosophers and things, Confucius, all these kind of guys, like they believe that maintaining the harmony of the group is the most important thing. And if you openly criticize someone, you're disrupting that harmony, and that is spread throughout the cultures within different countries within Southeast Asia, different regions of Asia, and that massively impacts how your interactions you have with people. So, for example, like during a Thai youth league game, one of my first games, the under 12 coach started instructing our players. So I said to my translator, like, just tell him one voice, please, because he doesn't work with his team. He doesn't know our game plan. He doesn't necessarily know what we're working on, what we're trying to do. And my translator said that to him. He left, and our relationship was basically more or less finished after that one intervention. And for me, if I had done that back in the UK or back in Ireland, wherever, there wouldn't have been a problem, because when you have those relationships with people, like you can have discussions, and the reason we're having these discussions is because we want to improve what we're doing. We want to try and better each other. We want to try and help each other. But whenever you give feedback in that way here, it's taken a lot more personally, because it affects their they lose face in front of the players in the sideline, and that affects their status, and that reflects upon their family and things. So it's a lot more deeper rooted, and like that's one of the first things you need to understand coming here. And if you take players to the side and explain things to them, they'll respect you for showing them that respect and not doing it in front of the group. And that's how you get people on side.
So is that how you would have treated that situation? If you could get in a time machine and go back, you would have taken him aside and done it in that manner?
Yeah, I would have told my translator to do it out of where people can't see at halftime or something, because it's just not worth losing people with one interaction like that. But at that stage, I had no idea. But those kind of lessons stand you in such good stead in the future, because you've experienced it firsthand. You've felt what it felt like. You've had to deal with the repercussions of it, because these things go on for a couple of days. They linger for a couple of days when you have these interactions. So it's very important that you're coming from an understanding of what works best in that environment. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for you.
It's interesting, Blaine, because as you're speaking now, I'm thinking about the phenomenon that status, your social status, is a prime mediator of experiencing stress and anxiety. That if somebody feels that their status, their social status has dropped, so somebody has given them a telling off, for instance, then that can create, not in everybody, but it can create anxiety and stress in any culture. It feels like that coaching practice that you spoke about there, taking somebody aside at an appropriate moment, giving them feedback in an appropriate way in that appropriate moment, is possibly a coaching practice that we need to inject into a Western culture more often. Again, no question, mate, just a thought there.
Yeah, 100%. And you can individualize it as well. So it's interesting in terms of that. You take them to the side of the individual feedback, but then the group feedback you can give in that setting, as long as you don't target people like too much, because especially as a coach, you don't have much time during halftime to go and talk to everyone, tell everyone everything's going to be okay. Sometimes you have to hammer the group as a whole to try and get that reaction what you need. So as again, it's just about using different ends of the dial, different things along. It's never kind of one end or the other. You've always got to find the right area of the spectrum that's going to get the best out of that moment.
You talked about having a translator there. I mean, how do you, those first few sessions, and I'm guessing you don't always have a translator in every. I mean, this is great. You've coached at grassroots, so I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming it's not like a coach coming in the Premier League who doesn't speak any English. This is grassroots stuff. Have you been confronted with a situation where you didn't have a translator and you had players who didn't speak any English? And if so, how did you cope with that?
Well, I've been very fortunate. Every kind of club I've coached from grassroots to professional level, every club
Okay.
I have had a translator, but the experiences I've had within that, because a lot of the translators you get,
Yeah.
they've just come out of university and they don't
Yeah.
understand football language. So I've had great conversations with translators at the side of the
Yeah.
field, and we've understood each other. But when we go onto the pitch, the players have not understood anything they've
Right.
said. Like in that moment, it was okay because I've been working with the players for a number of months. So over time, you develop trigger words, and the trigger words are so effective because
Mm.
when you say a word, if the translation is effective, you should see that behavior. So that's one of the easiest ways to see the impact that your translator's having. But that translator, basically what happened was there was a game at the weekend. She had an exam at university and
Mm.
was running late. The players hadn't understood anything she was saying. So I told the bus just to basically leave without her. So I went to this Thai youth league game with no translator. And it was difficult. I went into the changing room. I got cones out. I set them on the floor. I put them into our formation. I moved the cones around, trying to explain ideas using basic Thai, using trigger words. And then the leaders in the group would step up and they'd try and explain to the other players what I was talking about. But I was only able to do that because we had a translator during the week, and after a number of months, they understand the kind of key messages and the key things you're looking for. But then I went out onto the field and I tried to ask the goalkeeper coach in Thai what time we have to be in, the referee wants us to be in the tunnel. And he had no idea what I was saying. So you feel like you can coach sometimes when you've been in an environment with players for a long time, but you need a translator for logistics and to give that detail. And if I take it right back to my first match in Thailand, I was standing in the technical area of this stadium, and right away I realized, why am I standing here? I can't communicate with anyone, and I'd just been in the country for a week, so it was very very difficult. So I went and sat in the dugout, put my translator into the technical area, and kind of fed messages through him. So like, I've had all ends of the scale in terms of that, but getting a good translator it makes your life so much easier, because if you have someone that's not transferring messages properly, accurately, isn't giving the body language that you need, and they're not reliable, that can make your life very very stressful.
Do you think those kind of experiences, when you didn't have a translator, you had to use key words, cue words, a limited amount of Thai, and gestures, actions, moving cones around? Do you think that helps has helped your communication ability? Do you think that's put for you a magnifying glass on communication, on the importance of words and sentences and phrases and the sensitivity of language?
Yes, definitely both sides of it. So in terms of when a translator is not there, trying to use basic keywords and trying to use visual demonstrations has been massive. But also when you have a translator, like using very simple language, having a common language so that the translator can transfer your messages, because you have to get the translator has to understand you. Your communication has to be clear. You have to explain the sessions to them beforehand. Otherwise, they can't transfer that information to the player. So, and also it's interesting as well because when a translator is translating, it gives you a little more time to think. So when they're sending messages, you're thinking about your next message. So in a way that helps. Obviously, it's not ideal because it takes double the amount of time to get messages across. And sometimes you try and cut the translator out when you can in terms of demonstrations to try and make things a little bit quicker. But yeah, honestly, one of the best things you can do for your communication is to work in a foreign country with a translator, because you have to make things so clear. Otherwise, no one's going to understand what you're doing, and just life's going to be very difficult for yourself.
I think that that clarity is important, isn't it? And having experiences of striving to be as clear as you can possibly be, and thus being an environment that forces you to be that way. I'm also thinking of the importance of repetition and repetition of important coaching points, important cues, as you said, and Yeah, it just got my brain ticking away there in terms of it forces you into a position where you really need to appreciate language, and or you really need to appreciate the mini actions that can help you expose players to how you're trying to express yourself.
Yeah, and also in terms of they don't communicate. When you go to different countries, people don't always communicate in the same way. Like as we said before, people will be a lot more direct with their
Yeah.
communication in certain cultures. But whenever people, especially when there's hierarchies and things involved, like players might not always tell you the truth, coaching
Mm.
staff might not always tell you the truth. So you're trying to read body language. You're trying to find ways that you can put groups of people together that you'll get the message and idea across. And another example, whenever we wanted to understand how our coaches were feeling, the president's son would take the coaches drinking because in that setting they'd feel more relaxed. They'd be more likely to reveal how they're really feeling. Or an alternative idea is you get people on the same kind of level from the hierarchy to have discussions with each other, and then they feed back the key outcomes to someone else who tells you, because people don't always tell you things directly. So you've got to find different ways of reading how people are feeling and how people are performing within that environment.
But are there individual differences there, Blaine? Because obviously we're talking about culture here, but have your experiences demonstrated individual differences within a specific culture where maybe it's, I don't know, it's a more subservient culture, it's a culture that's not as, doesn't speak as straightforwardly perhaps as the culture that we've come, but there might be individuals within that culture who actually do that. Have you found that, or have you found it to be quite uniform in in the countries and the cultures that you've coached in?
Well, as we said, personality has a
Okay.
big part to play
Yeah.
in that as well. So your big five personality characteristics, they still have a factor within that environment. But the thing is, you can go into coach a group of Chinese players and you ask a question and you're met with silence. You
Yes.
might try and
Yes.
associate that they're
Yeah.
introverted and they don't want to say things, but then you'd be
Yeah.
missing the cultural lens. So you need to look at things through the
Yeah.
cultural lens
Yeah.
of that country, and then factoring in individual differences as well, because it depends on, for example, the president's son. The only reason I survived in Thailand was because he had been raised in New Zealand. So he was very open minded in terms of the way he saw things. He was able to help me explain the differences between cultures. He understood my approach because he'd been raised in a different environment, and obviously he is 100% Thai. So it depends on people's upbringing in terms of whether they've been overseas a bit, whether they've been ingrained within the local culture, and then you've also got to factor in the generational perspective and then also the personality perspective. And it's only once you've looked at all those angles can you really get a realistic picture of what's happening in front of you. Because if you just look at one thing, whether you look at personality or whether you look at culture, you can't see the full picture.
Interesting. So individual differences exist. An array of characteristics exists. The big five is there: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. Those are there, but and the literature, the research would back this up. The king here is really environment. You mentioned China there. If a bunch of young Chinese soccer players have grown up used to quite a subservient coaching environment where they're told what to do, you can be extroverted, you could be low agreeable, you can have be high openness, all of which lend themselves probably to being, well, certainly the extroversion, more gregarious within a social setting. But if they're used to, being more subservient in a coaching setting and at school, which kind of is synonymous with a coaching session, they'll act that way. They'll be more introverted. They'll be more agreeable. They'll probably be less open because they just want the coach to give them some answers.
Yeah, well, the culture reigns supreme. So the culture just underpins all of this. So you have all these differences within that,
Yeah.
but in certain settings,
Yes.
whenever like
Yeah.
when someone's older than them, like there's the age hierarchy, there's loads of things that filter in that cause certain behaviors and certain ways of seeing things based on like basically how they've lived their entire lives.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Hey, look, we've talked about the cultural chapters in your book. Where else do you go here from a psychological, a psychosocial perspective? Are there any other chapters in the book that maybe speak a little towards psychology or psychosocial?
Yeah, well, in every single chapter, there's elements of that, and
Okay,
especially in the coaches' journeys and things, the kind of things they have to put up with,
right.
like the adaptability. Things aren't always going to be done the way it would be in your homeland. You have to be a lot more adaptable. And going back to one we spoke about earlier as well, just being a coach, living in that environment and not really seeing your partner and things at home. I try to tap into those elements in the book because for a young coach, you can't really see those things. You don't really see the bigger picture. It's only once you've lived through these things in different countries, seeing how it impacts your life, that you realize there are things that are more important in football. So helping you gain a bit more perspective on life as well. But there's so many little nuggets that the coaches have lived through, and they've got over 100 years of experience coaching abroad as well. It's like, for me, it helped reinforce a lot of things for me. It taught me a lot of things going through this because, like, as I said before, when you're working, you don't always reflect on things as much as you should. You kind of just go through the cycle of work and what you've got to do every day, and you can't really see the bigger picture of where you're working and what you're doing in your life.
So, to somewhat put you on the spot, what would be, for those coaches listening in, what would be the top 3 bits of advice you would give a coach who is thinking, I really fancy going abroad and coaching? And certainly in the world of football in the UK, there are plenty of coaches looking towards that because it's tough to make a living as a coach here in the UK, as it is in many, many countries. But what would be your top 3 bits of advice, Blaine?
Well, networking would be the starting point because, especially abroad, a lot of these jobs don't get advertised. So, developing relationships with people at all levels of the pyramid, and like for me, a big one is like leaving your comfort zone. So, traveling, because you can contact people at the far side of the world, but they're not going to take you seriously until your feet land on the ground. And once your feet hit the ground, that's when the doors really open and people take you seriously. And the third one, just keep you've got to do a good job. Like if wherever you go, you have to do a good job. So you have to keep continually improving your coaching practice. And obviously the cultural element's a big part of that. But then wherever you have to go, you need to succeed. Otherwise you're not going to get other jobs. And penultimate chapter in the book, it kind of breaks down credibility into three main areas. So one is the profile that the coach can build. So essentially that's your CV, what it looks like on paper. Another one is your reputation. So it's what people are saying about you, the kind of messages they're spreading. And then the third one is your performance. People might get reputation and performance mixed up, but they're two very different things. So, for example, you can have a great reputation, but as soon as you land in a new environment with new players, that reputation goes out the window a certain bit. It can get you credibility at the start. People can respect you. But if the quality of your work is poor, that reputation won't last. That credibility won't last. So it's basically breaking those 3 things down because, as you said before, coaches can be successful in one environment and then they go to another environment. It presents completely different challenges. This can be coming from the owners above them. The club might not have the budget. And like even if you go back to that as well, like one of the coaches, our head coach in Ubon, he realized that the year after the team was going to struggle and the new coach coming into that environment. So we had one coach lined up to come in, but he didn't sign the contract because basically it said in the contract was if he got sacked, he wasn't going to get paid off. So when he decided to leave that, and then at the last minute when preseason had already been started, Mixu Patalainen came in, and Mixu Patalainen used to play for Bolton
Yep.
Wanderers. He used to be Dundee United's head coach, but he was coming into an environment where he didn't have a chance to succeed. So doing your research is so important when you go to these jobs because you can land in a foreign country. Even for me, when I landed, I was a quick fix. I had no idea when I signed the contract. I was a quick fix, and the problems I had to inherit initially, which caused myself a lot of stress. So go to different countries, meet people, try and do as much research as you can, and then that feeds into your traveling, networking, and then you've got to do a good job. Otherwise, you won't get work in football.
It's a journey. It's a journey, and it's a challenging journey. Blaine, I can't thank you enough for this conversation. Your book, Coaching Abroad, how can people get hold of a copy? And how can people follow you and contact you if you wish to be contacted?
It's on Amazon UK, so you can get that on paperback and Kindle. Also on Amazon US, Amazon Australia, same formats. And then for people around the world, you can get it on Book Depository, which has worldwide free shipping, I believe. So that should get you covered. I'm on Twitter at Blaine McKenna 77. So that's basically coaching related stuff. And I'm on Instagram, which basically shows life coaching abroad, the lifestyle elements. And that is BMCK 77.
Brilliant. Blaine, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Love chatting about all things culture, football, and psychology. My three favorite things.
Mine too. Mine too. Well, everybody, that was Blaine McKenna, and I really enjoyed that podcast. And I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.